Everyone thought I'd end up like my mother, addicted, unemployed, and unable to remember how to smile. But today, I'm standing in a boardroom on the 41st floor of a tower in downtown Seattle, signing a $300 million deal. Not because I got lucky, but because I never forgot the tears in my grandmother's eyes that winter night when I asked, "Did someone abandon me, Grandma?" My name is Amelia Rose Thompson. I'm 35 years old, CEO of one of the fastest-growing clean energy companies in America, and for many years, I lived with the unshakable feeling that I was a mistake in someone else's life story. I grew up in a two-bedroom house in the suburbs of Tacoma, Washington, where every wall had heard my mother's silent crying, and the neighbors' fights over the electric bill echoed through paper-thin walls. My parents divorced when I was 8, and in that decision, no one asked me, "Who do you want to live with?" Dad moved in with his new girlfriend. And Mom, she stayed, but not really. She lost her job, started drinking, and slowly slipped into a world I couldn't follow. Some nights, I'd wake up to find her passed out on the kitchen floor, still holding an empty beer can. Some days, I'd show up to school in a worn-out sweater, hair smelling like cigarette smoke, while my homeroom teacher looked at me with that mix of pity and discomfort that made me want to disappear. I don't remember exactly when I started to feel invisible, but I do remember this. No one in our neighborhood believed I would ever rise above the life I was born into. The only exception was my grandmother, a woman in her 70s with silver hair, fading eyesight, and hands that still tended a garden every morning. When my mother could no longer take care of me, Grandma took me in. Her house was small and old, but always clean and warm. She didn't have much money, but every night she'd save an apple for me to take to school. She'd say, "You don't need to be the strongest. You just need to not give up on yourself." I don't know why those words stayed with me so deeply. Maybe because they were the first time anyone had told me they believed in me. I'm standing now in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office on the 41st floor of Aurora Tower in downtown Seattle. Below, the I-5 highway hums endlessly, like the current of my life. In my hands is the biggest merger contract in my company's history, a $300 million deal with a European corporation restructuring its renewable energy division. I, Amelia Rose Thompson, CEO of Heliosol Inc., have just walked out of a 7-hour negotiation. Across from me sat a white man, 20 years older than I am, who first looked at me like, "What are you doing here, intern?" But now, he's the one shaking my hand, saying, "We believe in your vision." My office is minimalist. No expensive art. No velvet chairs. Just a small potted plant, like the ones my grandmother used to grow on her windowsill, and an old photo on my desk. In the photo, I'm 10, standing next to Grandma, holding a state-reading medal, mud on my face from falling off my bike. Success hasn't made me forget where I came from. It's only made me more grateful. Every morning I walk into this office at 6 a.m., I remember the sleepless nights filled with my mother screaming during withdrawal. Every time I'm invited to speak at a conference, I remember the 6th grade presentations where I kept my head down because I was wearing torn shoes. And every time I sign a contract, I think of my grandmother, the woman who cut her heart medication in half to save money for my math books. I'm not telling my story for sympathy. I'm telling it to remind myself and anyone else living in the dark that no one gets to define you but you. I was once the child of a failure. Now I'm rewriting my family's legacy. I grew up in a crumbling neighborhood on the south side of Tacoma, Washington. The kind of place that smelled like burnt plastic from a nearby recycling plant and had a "for sale, price reduced" sign hanging on the same porch for 3 years. Most of our neighbors were like my mom, people who once had dreams, went to college, then got swept away by divorce, depression, and a broken healthcare system that couldn't catch them. The kids around me? Some dropped out by 10th grade. Some got arrested for shoplifting. None of them thought about college. No one thought a little girl like me could dream of running a company. My mother used to be a nurse. But after my dad left, she fell apart. First it was alcohol. then painkillers, then opioids, the cycle modern America knows all too well. She once disappeared for 3 days, leaving me with a pack of instant noodles and a scribbled note. Don't call the police, I'll be back soon. I was 10 years old, but I never called the police. I called Grandma. She lived 2 hours away in a weathered wooden house on the outskirts of Olympia. She didn't have a college degree, didn't use social media, had no idea what email was. But she knew how to make rice porridge when I had a fever. She knew how to sit silently beside me when I couldn't explain my pain. She was the only one who believed I could succeed when public schools, neighbors, and even my own mother were too lost to believe in anything. I remember the winter I was 13, she knitted me a purple scarf and said, "This is the color I imagine you'll wear when you speak at an international conference one day." I laughed because I'd never even left Tacoma. But she wasn't joking. My childhood wasn't just marked by poverty. It was marked by invisibility, in an America where people see you through the lens of your skin color, your zip code, and your parents' job titles. But Grandma taught me something powerful. They can judge you, but they don't get to write your story. I still remember that night like it was just yesterday. February. Cold. Rain poured down, hammering my window like it was trying to tear apart every last dream I had left. I was studying for a midterm in biology when I heard sirens in the distance. At first, I didn't pay attention. Sirens were background noise in Tacoma. It was just part of everyday life. Sirens. Flashes of red and blue. But when those lights flooded my bedroom wall and stopped right outside our house, my heart froze. I ran out to the porch. 3 police officers stood at the front door. One of them looked at me and asked, his voice serious, "Are you Amelia Thompson?" I nodded. "We need you to come with us to the Temporary Youth Support Center. Your mother was arrested tonight for possession and use of narcotics in a residential area. There's no legal guardian on site." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't ask why. I just felt empty. They put me in the back of a patrol car. I clutched my backpack tightly. The only things inside were a notebook and a dry pair of socks. The youth shelter wasn't far, but for me, it was the longest ride I'd ever taken. I remember the smell of the cracked leather seats. I remember the song playing on the radio, Landslide by Fleetwood Mac. And I remember the glance from one of the officers, the only one who turned to look at me, and quietly said, "You shouldn't have to grow up like this." That night, I slept in a bunk bed under a thin blanket with a fluorescent light that never shut off. I listened to the girl above me cry into her pillow and the sound of the staff talking over walkie-talkies. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and thought about my grandma. I silently begged her to come like she always did. But that night, I was alone. The next morning, she really did come. Her eyes were red and swollen. She held me tight, so tight I thought she was afraid I might disappear. "We're going home," she whispered. "And from now on, you don't have to wait for someone to save you. I'll teach you how to save yourself." That was the day I understood. No one is coming to save you, but someone might give you wings. I moved in with her in Olympia, into a tiny wooden house where the heater only half worked in winter. 2 bedrooms. No dishwasher. No cable TV. But there was peace. There was the smell of apple pie. And there was the sound of my grandmother reading Emily Dickinson every night before bed. I enrolled at the local high school, a place where kids wore North Face hoodies and drove Jeep Wranglers gifted by their parents. And me? I wore a hand-me-down wool coat and walked 25 minutes each morning. On the first day, when the teacher called roll, I heard a girl giggle. "Amelia?" Like Amelia Bedelia? The whole class laughed. I forced a small smile, but it vanished the moment someone glanced at the fraying strap of my backpack. I didn't belong there. I didn't know how to start a conversation. I didn't have a smartphone to join the group chats. I didn't have the right clothes. I didn't have parents to sign permission slips for school trips. But I had books. And I had my grandmother. At night, after dinner, I helped her wash dishes. Then I'd sit down to read books I'd borrowed from the school library. My grandma, who hadn't studied past 12th grade, used to tell me, "When you study, you're choosing a different life. It won't be easy, but it's the right choice." I started working part-time at the public library. 10 hours a week. Minimum wage. I used the money to buy used books and saved every dollar I could for an SAT prep course. One night, I asked her, "Do you think I can make it to college?" She looked at me and said something I've carried with me ever since. "I don't think. I believe." I didn't have a sweet 16 party. I didn't go to prom. But I graduated with the highest GPA in my class, wrote an essay titled "The Power of the Invisible in Modern Society," and received an acceptance letter from the University of Washington with a partial scholarship. And I still remember that moment, standing by the mailbox, my hands shaking, seeing the school's logo on the envelope, turning to my grandma and whispering, "Grandma, they said yes." She hugged me, said nothing. But I saw the tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible anymore. In my sophomore year, I was majoring in business and social relations. That weekend, I was working on a group presentation about companies that create positive impact when I got a call from St. Peter's Hospital. "You're listed as the only next of kin. Your grandmother was just admitted after a major stroke. Her condition is critical." I ran across campus in the rain, caught the overnight bus to Olympia. When I arrived, she was in the ICU. Machines were hooked up to her everywhere. The nurse gave me 3 minutes to visit. Just 3. I held her hand. It was thin, speckled with age spots, still warm. But her eyes stayed closed. She couldn't speak. And then, the 3 minutes were up. She never woke up. Her funeral was simple. No music. No flowers. Just me, a few elderly neighbors, and an old white-haired pastor reading verses from the Bible. That night, I went back to the wooden house, where everything was painfully silent. The fridge was empty. My bank account had less than $150. I had no idea how I was going to pay rent. My scholarship had ended, and I had no one to co-sign the next student loan. Then I got an email from the school's financial office. "If payment is not received by the 30th, your enrollment will be suspended." I lay down on the old sofa, stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, I wanted to give up. I thought, why am I even doing this? What's the point of trying? She was the only one who believed in me, and now she's gone. I was about to call the school and withdraw. But then I opened the desk drawer, where Grandma used to hide chocolate and old utility bills, and found an envelope. On the front, she had written, "If one day you feel like there's no way forward, open this." With trembling hands, I tore it open. Inside was a check and a small handwritten note. "I've been saving for 15 years, $5 a week from my social support checks and selling baked goods. I'm not rich, but I believe you're meant for something big." The amount, $3,300. Enough to cover the next semester's tuition. Enough for me to keep going. That class only had 12 students, most of them rich kids taking it for an easy A. But Professor Martha Klein was different. She was the kind of person you couldn't lie to, couldn't slack off around, and couldn't forget. The first week, she gave us a strange assignment. "You have $100 and 3 days. Turn it into as much as possible, no online sales, no using personal connections. Operate as if you have nothing but your brain." Our group just stared at each other. The only idea came from me: host a free career counseling workshop at the city library and charge $5 per person for lunch we'd cook ourselves. A couple people laughed under their breath. But I said, "I used to live on $10 a week. Trust me, people will pay for something real." I convinced them to try it. I used my experience working at the library to reserve a room, handwrote posters, and called the Career Center for materials. It rained the day of the event, but over 40 people showed up. Final earnings, $382. When we presented the results to the class, I didn't expect much. But afterward, Professor Klein came up to me and said, "You have something CEOs talk about all the time, but few actually possess: resilience. The ability to bounce back. To find value in the rubble." I blushed, caught off guard. No one had ever said anything like that to me. I never thought of myself as a leader. I was just trying to survive. 2 weeks later, she emailed me. "There's a summer internship at Impact Edge, a consulting firm for nonprofits. They need someone who understands communities, not just theory. I've recommended you." I read that email 10 times. I couldn't believe it. When I got accepted, I cried. Because for the first time, someone other than Grandma believed in me, not out of pity, but because they truly saw me. Impact Edge was just a small firm back then. But it's where I learned how to turn knowledge into impact, how to use pain to create purpose. And for the first time, I began to imagine. Maybe I wasn't just going to survive, maybe I could actually succeed. Impact Edge was a tiny office in Seattle, 3 dusty floors in the middle of an industrial zone that smelled like burnt coffee and diesel trucks. I didn't even have a real desk. Just a spot by the printer where I parked my laptop, surrounded by paper stacks taller than my shoulders. I was the only intern not from the Ivy League, no glowing LinkedIn, no parents in the industry. The others arrived in rental cars from the airport. I caught the 6 a.m. city bus and stood for an hour because I couldn't afford a monthly pass. Week 1, someone mistook me for a delivery person. Week 2, they gave me an abandoned Excel project from last year. Week 3, I overheard whispers. "Who is that girl? Where's she even from? Why would Professor Klein recommend her?" I didn't answer. I just worked. I cleaned up files, fixed data errors, rewrote reports, and redesigned charts. At night, I studied PowerPoint, public speaking, and how to hide my exhaustion. Then one day, our team lead got sick and the client presentation wasn't ready. No one volunteered. I stayed up all night and finished it. The next morning, I submitted it on time. A few people still wouldn't look at me. But when the slides came up, the director asked, "Who made this?" It's clear, strategic, excellent. For the first time, they looked at me. Not with pity, with respect. I started getting invited to meetings, then asked for input. The next project, I worked directly with a nonprofit supporting homeless women. They didn't care where I studied. They asked, "Have you ever gone hungry?" I nodded. They said, "Then you'll understand how we want to help them." I didn't just work the job, I lived it, and I realized everything I was once ashamed of, poverty, loss, loneliness, was actually my greatest asset. I didn't become a CEO because I was better than anyone. I became a CEO because I knew how to stand when there was nothing left to lean on. I'll never forget that call from Jason Clark, the executive director. It was a gloomy Friday afternoon. I had just finished a spreadsheet for a big client and was getting ready to leave when my phone rang. "Amelia, there's a new project I want you to lead." Both of us knew I wasn't the first choice. Truthfully, I was the only one left. The project was critical, a nonprofit in financial crisis, needing a full restructuring plan in 3 months. The bigger problem was internal doubt, even within our own company. If this failed, careers and reputations were on the line. I hesitated. Part of me said I couldn't pass up the opportunity. The other part was terrified I wasn't good enough. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment, surrounded by paperwork and project outlines, and told myself, if I can't pull this off, I might never get another shot. I didn't sleep that night. I mapped out a plan, step by step, starting with understanding the nonprofit's current financial situation, all the way to identifying the right team to lead the restructuring. I listened, took notes, did my research, and left no detail unnoticed. The next day, I called a meeting with the team. They were all seasoned professionals, and I was the only one who had never led a project like this before. But I didn't let that stop me. I said, we're starting from scratch. Step 1 is to truly understand what this organization needs. And step 2 is to help them believe they can rebuild their lives, just like we did. Everyone looked at me seriously. For the first time, I didn't just feel like a part of the team, I felt like I was leading it. For the next 3 months, my team and I worked nonstop. We restructured the organization from the ground up, from financial management to strategic development. When the project ended, it was a resounding success. The nonprofit not only escaped its financial crisis, but came back stronger than ever. That time, I didn't just earn the trust of my superiors, I earned the respect of my peers. The same people who once looked at me like I had no future. When Director Clark called me into his office, he said, "Amelia, you did a great job. You didn't just complete the project, you proved you can lead." I didn't cry, but I knew that moment changed my life. I hadn't just found an opportunity, I created one for myself. I stood on the rooftop of the Impact Edge building, looking out over the glowing city streets. A strange feeling washed over me, not pride, but a quiet loneliness. Becoming CEO of a growing company was never something I had imagined. I always thought I'd be the one watching from the sidelines, learning from others. But now I was the one at the top, and it felt like no one remembered the girl who used to ride the bus to work every day. There were nights I couldn't sleep. The company was thriving, but with that came growing pressure from investors and partners. I was constantly faced with tough decisions, some of which weren't always morally clear. One time, I received a proposal from a major investor. They wanted me to help them acquire a small company that had potential, but was struggling. The deal would bring short-term profit to Impact Edge. I sat in my office, staring at that email. A question echoed in my head, one I couldn't shake. How do I stay ethical when every decision feels like a trade-off between profit and principle? The next day, I met with our CFO, Tom, someone I trusted deeply. I asked him, "Tom, if we buy this company, are we going to hurt the people who work there?" He looked at me, his eyes heavy. "You could go through with it, and no one would know. But if you do, a lot of people will be affected." His words snapped me out of it. I realized that while I could keep chasing growth, it wouldn't mean anything if I lost the respect I had worked so hard to earn. I chose not to sign the deal. I told our shareholders we would find another way, one that wouldn't cost us our values. That decision wasn't easy. I knew there would be pushback, even from people with real power. But deep down, I understood something important. True success isn't just measured by profit, it's measured by the kind of respect that only comes from doing the right thing. Looking back at the company I helped build, I realized this. No matter how high you rise, it all means nothing if you lose yourself along the way. Everything came crashing down on a day I'll never forget. During a high-stakes strategy meeting, I made the call to halt a promising project. It caused a rift between me and several shareholders. Some left, and the consequences were harsher than I expected. But the most painful blow came from home. My mother passed away suddenly from a stroke. We couldn't save her. I hadn't been there during her final months, too caught up in work, meetings, and everything I thought mattered. In the face of that loss, I felt torn between two worlds. One world was full of shareholder calls, financial reports, and executive meetings. The other was the silence my mother left behind, the childhood memories I had buried, the haunting loneliness that never really left me, even after I had everything: money, power, recognition. One morning, sitting in my office, staring out the window, I had a realization. Everything I'd built meant nothing without the people who truly mattered. The ones I'd forgotten. The ones I'd once thought were less important than my work. So I made a decision to step away from the company for a while. I didn't resign. I gave myself space, a quiet pause to reconnect, to face my mistakes and my grief. I returned to my grandmother, the one person who had always loved me unconditionally, who taught me what resilience really means, what it means to never give up on yourself. During that time, I began writing stories about my family, about my mother, about the days I had long forgotten. The pages weren't just memories, they became part of my healing. They reminded me that success is not the only thing that matters. Little by little, I came to understand something profound. Loss had taught me the most important lesson of all: cherish the small things, the real relationships, and the quiet moments that make life worth living. I found myself again, not in career milestones, but in love and memory. When I returned to the company after my break, I was no longer driven by ambition or external recognition. I no longer chased numbers or hollow targets. I had found something deeper, a sense of purpose. One morning, as I walked into the office, I noticed something had changed. People looked at me differently. Not as the powerful CEO, but as someone who had grown, someone who had been through something real, and had come back with a deeper understanding of work, life, and what truly matters. I decided to embark on a new project. But this time, it wasn't about profit, it was a community initiative. I began building a skills training program for women with limited career opportunities, women who had been forgotten by society. This initiative wasn't just about work, it was about giving back. How could I help people like me, those who had gone through pain and loss, regain their confidence? How could I help them not only get back on their feet, but rise even higher? This project gave me a renewed sense of purpose. It helped me realize that a career isn't just about money or power. It's a chance to make a real impact, to create meaningful change. I started inspiring the women in the program. I saw them transform not just in skill set, but in mindset and self-belief. One day, a woman in my group shared that she had landed her dream job and was ready to start a new chapter in her life. Her story reminded me of my own, starting from nothing, facing relentless challenges. But those very challenges made me stronger. At the end of one of our meetings, I stood before the participants, women whose lives had been changed by the program. They looked at me with gratitude, and I realized I had done something right. I hadn't just built a career, I had built a life that meant something. Looking back on everything I'd been through, I realized something important. Work alone doesn't bring happiness. It's balance that truly matters. After completing the training project and seeing the positive changes in those women, I no longer felt the need to prove anything. I didn't need titles or material success. I found joy in giving, in helping others, and in living a life that felt true to who I was. One afternoon, I decided to sit with my grandmother, the woman who had always been my source of inspiration. We sat in the park, under the shade of a tree, and talked about old memories. I asked her about the hard times in her life, and she simply smiled. When you learn to love yourself, everything gets easier. Her words lit something inside me. Over the years, I had forgotten such a simple truth. I had been so consumed by work and ambition that I had lost sight of myself. Sometimes, real success doesn't come from chasing external rewards. It comes from finding peace within, from accepting your flaws and appreciating what you already have. To me, work is no longer everything. I've started to slow down, to make time for family, for friends, and especially for myself. I even started revisiting old hobbies, painting, reading, little things that brought calm and clarity to my soul. When I returned to work, I approached everything differently. I no longer set goals based solely on profits or numbers. Instead, I encouraged my team to find their true purpose in what they do, to work with passion and never give up, just as I had learned to do. Ultimately, I came to understand that happiness isn't something you can grasp all at once. It comes from small, meaningful moments, from choosing how to live each day, and from the love you give to those around you. I no longer feel alone. I no longer feel like I'm racing in a competition without a finish line. I've found harmony where work and family are no longer in conflict, but part of a complete, fulfilling life. And maybe that's the real definition of success, not the titles, not the wealth, but the peace and joy you carry in your heart. Over the years, I've learned that life isn't just about what we achieve, it's about what we leave behind for others. Now that I've found peace within myself, I know my journey isn't just mine alone. I have a responsibility to my family, to my community, and to those I have the power to uplift. I began hosting talks and coaching sessions for young women, women like I once was, who didn't yet know who they could become. In these sessions, I didn't just talk about success, I talked about failure, about the hardships I had faced and overcome. I shared that success doesn't come from avoiding failure, it comes from how you rise after you fall. One day, a young woman came up to me after a session. She said, "I've always felt like I wasn't good enough. But after hearing you speak, I feel like I can do it. Thank you for showing me that people can change." Her words brought me back to my younger self, an anxious, uncertain girl. I couldn't stop smiling, knowing I had helped someone find light in their life. I don't want to be remembered just as a successful CEO. I want to be remembered as someone who taught perseverance, authenticity, and compassion. The lessons I learned from my grandmother, my mother, and life itself. On the final day of the training program, I looked out at the radiant faces of these women, ready to take on the world with renewed confidence. And I realized I hadn't just helped them build careers, I had helped them build lives full of hope and belief. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. Legacy isn't about what you own. It's about what you pass on. My legacy won't be the company I built or the accolades I earned. It will be the stories, the lessons, and the people who rose from the seeds I planted. When I think about my journey, I no longer feel regret or remorse. I feel peace because I lived a life that mattered, and I did the right thing.